Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. This is the show in which I celebrate artists and their body of worth. Now, some people think of artists, in the theater as those that are on the stage. But there are artists behind the scenes as well. The stagehands, the stage crew, the writers, the producers, the directors. And today we have one of those artists, and I'm very excited to be celebrating him. And that's the one and only Robert Viagas. How are you, Robert?
Richard, thanks for having me on. Thanks for celebrating what we're doing over here. You've done such a great job just keeping the community together through all these dark months. Good man.
I appreciate your saying that. That means a lot to me, especially coming from you. I have to, before we even delve in, there's not a person out there who doesn't know that we've been going through this pandemic since March. Today marks 246 days since our theaters shut down.
And I feel every hour of it, my friend. I feel every hour of it.
But I want to say it's not always doom and gloom because you, I hope you don't mind my saying this, are on your honeymoon right now. You just got married.
That's right. That's right. My grade school sweetheart, we reconnected at a reunion last year, and the flame was still there after all these, I think it's about 10,000 years. And yet she still looks like she's 20.
Well, you know, I saw the pictures and I would agree with you. And I have to say also, it reminds me so much of Carol Channing and Harry Collegian. When
exactly.
She met her high school sweetheart so many years later. She said that, she can't speak for men, but you and I both can. But she said women never forget their first love, and I don't think we do either.
I didn't forget mine, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm very happy.
I didn't think she was interested in me. I mean, in those days, I was very interested in her. I didn't think she was quite so interested in me. But I'm happy to say she's lowered her standards enough, and she finally said yes.
Well, I think it's wonderful. I want to ask you, excluding the marriage, and but I want to know how you're doing beyond that, both of you, really in the midst of this crazy world we find ourselves in.
Well, you know, it's interesting that COVID has been so horrible in so many ways for everybody. We have relatives who work in hospital emergency rooms, and the stories that they've been telling us, it's just been a nightmare. But we've been trying to. When this whole thing started, as a matter of fact, we were just dating. We'd really just kind of just started dating, and she said, "Would you like to shelter with me?" And so we've had a chance to rediscover a relationship in the middle of all these horrible things. We've really tried to make the best of it. We really our love has kind of grown it's like a flower on a battlefield is the way I felt about it.
Wow.
But at the same time also, I was working on this magazine project, which we had talked about doing a year ago. And we were right in the middle of putting it into gear when suddenly COVID hit and they closed the theaters down. And you can imagine how that struck us. And after a couple of months, I know a lot of people were sort of stunned when this first happened. What are we going to do? How are we going to approach it? But then, we started thinking, how can we, now that life has given us a lemon, how can we make lemonade out of it? And we started to realize that people want to stay connected. They want to stay connected with the theater. They want to keep that in some way, the best way they can, which is one of the reasons why your show is such a service to people, because it enables people, it shows them the theater artists are still working, that they're still coming up with ideas, they're still writing plays, they're still performing, they're finding new ways to perform. But, and in the middle of all this, we decided, if we start this magazine, maybe this will be a way for people to to continue to stay connected throughout this, and then even beyond when the theaters relight and the curtains rise again. But in the meantime, this could be a way for us to help people stay connected. So, and that has been the reaction that we've gotten because we've been trying to get theaters around the country and in New York to be constituents to help promote the magazine. And I've just been amazed by how many of these theaters just jumped in there and like, thank God we really have something that we can keep our audiences engaged with. So we started out thinking this was the worst time to have started this. And it may have been the best time to have started this, because we're also gotten these incredible writers and who have been, mighty engines have been idling throughout all of this. And we're giving them a chance to get into gear again.
Now, there are so many theater magazines over the years that, unfortunately have come and gone.
Yes.
I know that
Theater Week, In Theater, so many.
The Goodspeed Opera House used to have an incredible magazine that I miss terribly.
Show Music, which I wrote for.
I know you did. And then there's Theater Mania, and which started out as a magazine, and Theater Scene, and so many other things. And plug for you, sitting right here on my shelf, one of your books.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all of your books.
You got all 19 of my theater books? I have
not all of them, but I've got most of them. But I want to ask you, is this solely an online magazine, or is there a paper publication?
The mothership is going to be a paper publication. It's going to be a beautiful, full-size, excellent paper stock, lots of pictures, a beautiful magazine. That will be the mothership. But of course, it's 2021, and we're going to have to, have an online dimension to it. And we do now. It's EncoreMonthly.com, and we have some samples from what we're working on. But we really want it to be a showcase, and we think we have a formula that is going to succeed where these other magazines did not. But an example for the images, who do we have? We have Joan Marcus as our photo editor. I don't know if you know Joan. She takes about 3/4 of the production shots that you see in newspapers and magazines, and that has given us access to her incredible library of photos. And of course, the ones that she didn't take herself, she knows all the photographers. They're all her friends. So we've just been getting unbelievable photos here and from overseas. The number of fantastic images that have been flooding into our offices has been really exciting to me. You can imagine, as a lifelong theater fan, theater geek from the earliest age, you can imagine how excited I am to be working on this.
Now, is this your brainchild, or how did the magazine come about?
It was actually two publishers, Brantley Manderson and Louis Doucette, who had the idea. There was a niche. They felt there was no theater magazine out there, and they felt that this would be something that they could get a good readership and they could get good advertising. And because of the quality of what they work on, they thought that this would be an ideal thing. And so they asked around, and Brantley had worked for my alma mater, Playbill, and she knew some of my work. And we had another person in between suggested my name, and they approached me, and I said, I would just love nothing better, because I had taken early retirement from Playbill in 2018, and it is great to be back behind the wheel of a big truck again.
That's great. How long were you with Playbill?
24 years.
Wow.
24 years. And I started playbill.com. That was, when I was a kid, when I was 17 years old, I thought to myself, why don't the newspapers, which was the dominant media at the time, why don't the newspapers put theater news on the front page every day? They put sports news and politics and all these other things that are irrelevant. They don't get to the really important thing, which is the theater news. And so number one, and I also then worked as an intern at Newsday. I mean, I was trained as a reporter. And I worked for a variety of newspapers over the years. But, my dream was, I said, wouldn't it be great if we could start an all theater newspaper? An all theater newspaper. The problem is, at that time, the method of delivery was 12-year-olds on bicycles, and that we'd have to hire a lot of them to deliver my imagined theater newspaper around the country. And then along came the internet. Oh, this was perfect. We eliminated the 12-year-olds on bicycles, and we didn't have to chop down any trees anymore. So suddenly we were able to put out this newspaper, theater newspaper, that could go all over the country. And it was very exciting to me because, as I said, that was a dream. But when they came along this time, that was a great idea for a theater publication in the 1990s. We started it in 1994. Things have changed, partly because of what we did with that. The industry has become much more audience-oriented. It used to be all about the stars. Now it's much more about the audience. People don't have to wait for the theater critics to come out with their reviews. They can write their reviews and post them on their web. It's the democratization of criticism. But also people like to talk about their fans. They like to create things. They like to get involved much more. And so I'm creating a magazine and a website that is going to be much more oriented towards the audience. Because, Richard, I have a theory, and this may be a crackpot theory, and I have several of them, but this is one of them. I don't believe that theater happens on the stage. I believe that theater happens in the audience, happens in the hearts and minds of the people watching the show. What's happening on stage is designed to evoke theater. Theater happens inside of you. And so this magazine is going to be about the fans. It's going to be about the audience. Yes, of course, we're going to have a million pictures of Patty and Bernadette and Lin-Manuel and all the people that you love. But it's going to be oriented towards the fans, towards the readers. And I think this is, everybody who has seen our prototype has gotten very excited by this particular concept. Because don't forget, for years, even I have credits on the internet going back to the 1980s when I worked for a company called Prodigy. And my title at Prodigy was one of my favorite titles I've ever had in my career, theater expert. People would write to me with things like, we're going to see something at the booth. Are the boxes at the booth any good? Can you see the stage? I have long legs. Will I be able to fit into the Lyceum? What should I wear? If I'm taking, how can I get tickets? So a lot of people want to know how to get discount tickets, but a lot of people also, they don't care about the price, which is why theater tickets have become so expensive. What they want is they want tickets for Hamilton in the orchestra this Saturday night. The show is sold out. How can I get tickets? I bet I could get tickets somehow. These are all the crazy questions that I answered for years. And all of this experience and what people want to know, what people are interested in, has gone into my planning for this magazine. And my partners, Brantley Manderson, Louis Doucette, they've been very happy with what they've seen so far. If I mention some names of writers, do you know who Peter Felicia is?
Who doesn't know who Peter Felicia is?
Ken Bloom.
Of course.
Cara Joy David.
Yes.
Spencer, Seth Rudetsky. These are all people who are writing for my wonderful magazine. They're all available.
If you can get them all together.
They're all together already.
No, but what I'm saying is if you can get them all together, we'll do a round table.
Woo!
Right here, and we can all just have a discussion, and we'll take questions from our audience who are watching.
It's very important to me that not only are we covering a diverse theater, all the things that are happening, not just mainstream theater. We want to cover theater around the country. We also want to make sure that all the voices, all the different ethnic voices, all the different gender voices that are theater in the 2020s, that will be the theater, that will be making theater in the post-COVID era, they're all reflected not only in what we cover, but also we have a wonderful diversity of writers. I've mentioned some that are better known, but I have found some incredible writers of color, writers of different genders, some very, very young people who are theater nuts, and remind me of me when I had my little column in the Franklin Square Bulletin when I was 17 years old, and I was completely obsessed, to use Seth's term, with theater. And I have dug up some wonderful writers who are also going to be contributing to this. It's just been such a delight. And the horror of COVID, unfortunately, every cloud has a silver lining, and this has so much been the silver lining. And I hope it will be for the theater community too. And you're in it, my friend. You are in it. In my initial issue, I'm going to be doing a story on some of the heroes of the COVID era, some of the people who kept the flame burning. And you, my friend, as you know, because I've asked you for a picture, you are one of those heroes.
Wow, wow. You're going to bring tears to my eyes. Because I love this profession so much. And my heart aches at not just the names, some of the names that you mentioned, but the people that people don't know, the people who are the ushers and the people selling merchandise and all of those people who are currently out of work. And the fact, the theater, you think about 9/11, when 9/11 happened, the theater shut down for 2 days and then it came back because people needed to come together. And the fact that right now that people are not able to come together and audiences are not able to get together, we've got to find more and more ways of being connected. And so I applaud you for doing this. I want to go back when, as I said, the theater shut down on March 12th.
That's right. The day that will live in infamy.
What did your calendar look like on March 11th?
It so happened I was negotiating for the contract to do this magazine. We were going to get started right then. And when we got that message from Charlotte St. Martin, the head of the Broadway League, that the theaters were closing down, my two publishers said, let's hold off on this a little bit. And I was like, oh, we were just about to sign that contract. So that was quite a week. That was also the week that Donna asked me to stay and to shelter in place with her, which was changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a hurricane of good and bad, all swirling around at the same time. We didn't know what the future was going to hold.
Remember, everybody thought the theater would be back in a month, and then it would be back in 3 months, and then it would be back in 6 months. And
originally they said April 4th. They said April 4th. We're going to close the theater to April 4th, just to be careful. One of the things from one of my stories in the first magazine, I spoke to producers and directors and performers all over the country. And don't forget, it was the height of the spring season. Everybody was in previews. Everybody was in rehearsals. There was so many projects. You know who my heart really breaks for is the musical Six, because they were supposed to open that night. That was supposed to be, and so they were like preparing for their big opening night, and it just never came. It was a killer. My heart just bleeds for those people. But as I surveyed around the country, people were in rehearsals. People were getting ready. People were planning their weekends. They were just planning their theater lives as if it was going to go ahead in a normal way. And people knew things were getting bad, but they had no idea how bad it was going to get. And here it is, all these months later, still dark.
Many years ago, I had a friend who was working with an artist friend, and the artist friend one day just suddenly dropped dead. And he wanted me to come over and see the work that this person, his entire apartment was a piece of art. Each room had a theme. Each room had all this going on. And I went to see the apartment, and everything was in suspended animation.
Right.
And it reminded me, I had this epiphany moment that it could all be gone. And my hope is that everyone will look at this period as a pause, and we will never take for granted ever again what we had, what we have, and what we could have in the future. Right. And that's my hope that comes out of all this. As I've said, doing these programs, you have such an appreciation, or I do now. I always did, but an even greater appreciation for the lighting guys and the sound guys and everyone that comes together to make these shows a reality and makes them happen. I want to go back to your love of the theater and where that started. Did you have aspirations to be a performer? Did you ever pursue a career as an actor?
Well, I always loved theater, even before I knew even really what Broadway was, because I grew up in a working class family, so we didn't have a lot of money to see shows. I used to watch in the New York area. Channel 9 used to have something called the 4:30 movie, and the 4:30 movie, they would play usually a musical, and they would not only play every Monday afternoon from 4:30 to 6, and God knows they would cut the heck out of those movies to make them fit into 4:30 to 6. And they would show the same movie every day. They would show it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Friday. So you could watch the same movie over and over again. So I would watch Bye Bye Birdie and The Music Man and all these things. Years later, when I got the cast albums, I realized there was how many songs they cut out to make it fit into that time slot. But I always was really interested. And when I learned my father was a musician. He was a jazz musician.
Okay.
And he said that all of us, the three brothers, myself and my two brothers, we could play any instrument we wanted, but when we hit the age of 7, we had to pick an instrument to play. So I started to play the guitar. Now, don't forget now, I'm pretty up there. So this was in the 1960s. You know what kind of popular music there was in the 60s. I still have my old notebook because the teacher would say every week, give me some songs that you want to learn how to play. Richard, they were all show tunes. That's all I asked for was show tunes. And it was a challenge for him because, of course, the Beatles were at their maximum at that time, and all these other things. So it was just something inborn. It was something inborn. Then years later, I had a friend who used to take me to see shows with him. David Spencer is his name. He's a lyricist and a composer. And when we were teenagers, he used to write for our local newspaper. He had a column.
You grew up here in New York?
I grew up in suburban Long Island.
Okay.
And I was born in Brooklyn. My parents moved here to suburban Long Island. And David used to review the shows. And I think partly because we were friends, but also partly because I'm 6'4", and at the time I was kind of built like a linebacker. We would, I think I was there partly to act as his bodyguard because the Times Square was very dangerous during that period. But then as things went along, he went off to college. He got a girlfriend. So I was out on my free ticket. So I took over his column on my local newspaper so that I could get free tickets to shows. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me as a theater journalist. I just loved doing it. I loved going. Originally, I was going to be a veterinarian. But after a while, it was just like,
you would have been like Dr. Dolittle singing to the animals.
That's right. I loved that movie too. I really loved the score.
Oh, me too. But I grew up in South Carolina. I grew up in a small town just outside of Myrtle Beach. I had a great mentor who gave me such an appreciation for all of the artists that have gone before us. And she always used to say to me, every time you walk on stage, you're carrying the mantle of every person who's come before you. That's true. My parents used to drop me off at the library in my hometown on a Saturday morning when they did their errands. And this was in the days where you had to go to the telephone office to pay the telephone bill and do all those things. And I used to get the New York Times, and I would immediately get the preceding Sunday's Times, go to find whatever Hirschfeld drawing was in the paper, and count the Ninas. And I learned this while I was growing up in South Carolina. How are you finding your audience with Encore magazine beyond the theater audience, the usual suspects who are going to gravitate towards this? How are you finding that audience beyond the borders?
Well, we've hired a wonderful company. Serino Coyne is going to be doing our marketing. They do a lot of marketing for Broadway shows, and we've discussed exactly this. We want to make sure, sort of like a politician. This simile has been very much in the news lately. We want to be like them in that we want to make sure we energize our base, but we also want to extend beyond that. And they have a plan for getting the word out. I don't know if you've been on Facebook, but our ads have been all over Facebook. Anybody who expresses the slightest interest in theater, boom, they see Encore Monthly popping up. So we've really been trying to go to social media for these things. We're offering a special deal for people who ordinarily would buy tickets to shows. When we love them, they buy tickets to shows. But if they're looking for a theater-related Christmas present, EncoreMonthly.com, you can actually order them now at a discount. And we're hoping that all those crazy aunts and uncles who have nieces and nephews that they want to get involved in theater will give that as the Christmas present. Just like they would say, I'm going to take you into New York, or I'm going to take you to my big local theater, and I'm going to introduce you to Broadway musicals. They can't necessarily do that now. We don't just do musicals, we do plays and musicals, of course. But we figure this is a way that we can also expand to a younger generation. We have that generation very much in mind. We have the generation that, there was a long time where there were no show tunes in the popular culture.
That's right.
There was a period of time when the whole top 40 was all show tunes. But then after the 60s and 70s, that kind of disappeared. But then all of a sudden, in the 1990s, suddenly Disney started doing all these wonderful animated film musicals. And those kids who grew up listening to Little Mermaid and listening to Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and all these other wonderful Disney films, those are the same kids.
The anniversary of The Lion King opening on Broadway.
There we go. And then, of course, it moved to Broadway. And so a lot of people started to see them on Broadway. But then there was High School Musical and Glee and Smash, and suddenly there was a lot and they started doing musicals on television again. They started doing those specials. I wish they could do them a little better than they do them, but they started doing them. And then along came.
My thought on that is, thank God they're doing them.
Right, that's right, getting that out there.
Yeah,
then Hamilton, and then Dear Evan Hansen, and so now some of these kids who grew up at these things, they have kids of their own. Generation is going to be the heart of the theater audience of the 2020s and the 2030s. People nowadays don't tend to look into the future, but we have to. That's where we're going to live. And theater is going to be different in the 2020s. It's going to be different from what we saw
very
before.
different. But in
the 2030s.
I heard an interview with Jessica Lange, and she talked about being a child and growing up with Playhouse 90 and all of these. There were 3 networks. Think about this, everyone. 3 networks. And yet there was so much live theater on all of those networks. And they were reaching a bigger audience. And she says, now we have 5,000 channels and and people are out of work. I mean, there are so many opportunities that I think, and especially with the internet, people are finding new ways of getting product out there and everything. How will you be utilizing the world of social media in relation to your magazine?
We have hired a full-time person who is going to be pumping information. We will be moving news stories. We will be doing a lot of interactive things, and they'll be pushing it out on Instagram and on Twitter and on Facebook and on TikTok. As a matter of fact, we have a whole thing on TikTok coming up for the second issue. We are going to, as I said, this is very, very important to us. We're going to be a theater magazine in the 2020s. We have to do these things. And this is where people stay engaged. Not only people staying engaged with the theater, but people staying engaged with one another. That's the audience thing that I was talking to. There is a cohesiveness to the audience that there never was before, other than going out for coffee after seeing a show. There was very little audience to audience connection, whereas now there is. And we are going to very much be pursuing that. Absolutely. It is mission critical to what Encore Monthly is planning.
And what was the first Broadway show that you saw?
Well, as I mentioned, I saw a lot of things on television because we were a working class family. But I remember watching Mary Martin in Peter Pan on television. And when they're flying out the window, and little Michael is about to go, and the nursemaid comes in and she says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I'm going to Neverland." And he flings a fairy dust on her, and he shoots out the window. And I have to tell you, I went right out that window with that little kid, and I never came back.
Well, but literally answer both arms.
Well, also Sound of Music, the movie Sound of Music, the movie of Mary Poppins. It was incredible. But in 1971, so this is 77,000 years ago now,
Mhm.
there it was still the Ice Age was still going on. There were still dinosaurs. In 1971, my eighth grade class, I had a wonderful teacher. Her name was Miss Heidengren. She took us up to the Shakespeare Theater in Connecticut. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. But we were introduced to, I saw my first Shakespeare in her class, which was Julius Caesar. And then she decided that we were going to, oh, and we also studied A West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet side by side. I think some classes still do that. But she decided you must see a Broadway show. And they put us all on a bus. We went in and we saw Man of La Mancha. The original run was at the end of the original run, but I got to see the original run of Man of La Mancha. And I don't know if you remember this. You may be too young to remember the staging. It's set in this cell. They're in prison,
Mhm.
and this big drawbridge comes down from the back of the stage from high above, and it lands, and there's this long staircase. It's like a Ziegfeld staircase, and down this staircase comes poor little Cervantes and his servant, and he's clutching the manuscript of his book,
Mhm.
and that he's been sent to prison for writing. It was so theatrical. It was just like as if I had grabbed a wire on a telephone pole, and the electricity that shot through me watching that production of Man of La Mancha, and every scene was incredibly theatrical. At one point, he's telling the story of Don Quixote to the other prisoners, and he says, "I shall become a man," and he has a makeup kit, and he starts turning himself into Don Quixote. It's
Mhm.
like, ah, I've always only seen I've only seen media that are incredibly literal. This is the first one where my imagination was shifted into a drive, and I was never the same. But I'm telling you, between Man of La Mancha and Peter Pan, I was doomed, my friend. I was doomed, and here I am, thousands of years later, now starting another theater magazine because I love it.
Well, that's wonderful. Yesterday, I interviewed Dory Berenstein, and she said that when she was,
Oh, she's the greatest. I love her. Broadway
I'm
podcast.
crazy about her. If she's watching, I'm crazy about her. But she said that when she was 5 years old, her parents took her to see Carol Channing and Hello Dolly. But she said that as much as she was loving what she was seeing on stage, she was so enthralled with what was happening behind the scenes, how they were getting the sets on and how things were changing. Have you ever worked on a production?
Well, I have to tell you, I when I got to high school, I was tall, I was male, and I came to rehearsals. And my friend, that is the formula for stardom in high school musicals. Um, I started out. I was Society Max in Guys and Dolls when I was in seventh grade. And Society Max, all he has to do is Brannigan is walking down the line. We all have our flowers on because we're going to the crap game. And he goes, "Oh, everybody's here. Liver Lips Louie, Society Max." And I hooked my staging was I hooked my thumbs under my armpits and I just did a little bounce. That was it. That was all I did. I was a Cockney in My Fair Lady. I was Vittorio Vidal in Sweet Charity. Then I finally made it to the top of the bill. I was Chuck Baxter in Promises, Promises, which was probably my favorite role. And then I was Albert Peterson in Bye Bye Birdie. And so I did a fair amount of acting, but you know something, Richard? I didn't want to be an actor. I really wanted to be a theater journalist. And probably not a lot of people want to do that.
Let me ask you this: was there
But I did.
knowing that this is where you wanted to be and knowing this is what you wanted to do, what was the career path that you set out for yourself, or did you create your own niche?
I really want to. I have writers that I admire enormously, and a lot of them are journalists. And I felt that there were a lot of people whose writing I didn't respect because they didn't have journalistic training. They knew a lot about theater, but they didn't know about writing. They didn't know about journalism. So I set out to become a real journalist. I was an intern at Newsday as a Although interestingly, my first byline in Newsday was about a concert with theater people in it, completely by coincidence. Then I was a hard news reporter. I worked for the Gannett newspapers in Westchester, and I covered fires and murders and politics, which are actually quite similar to one another. And I did that for a pretty long time before I started to specialize in the field that I wanted to specialize in. And I feel like I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal about how stories are structured, what is news, what's not news. And I told you I wanted to do this theater newspaper. News was always kind of my my way in. But a lot of people I admire, like H.L. Mencken, are magazine editors, and that's something that I really crave to do, and I did get to do it.
Well, going back to playbill.com and that starting, was there a lot of resistance to going into the world of social media at that time, or was it an easy transition for everyone?
I have to tell you, when we started in 1994, nobody knew what the internet was. They just didn't. I remember calling up somebody who's still pretty well known on Broadway and saying, we're starting this new thing, and you'll be able to get theater news on your computer. And he was just like, but how is it going to get on my computer? Are you going to come to my office and type it in every day? No. We're going to, there are these things called modems. So there was a little bit of resistance at the very beginning, but you know something, when we started, people said, how many theater stories can there be? I mean, like, well, there's only like 1 or 2 stories a week. And I said, well, it depends how you define theater news. If when the show is announced, you do a story, and when they start to cast, instead of waiting till the whole cast is assembled, as the people join the cast, those are all news stories. When the box office opens, it's a news story. When they pick the theater, it's a news story. I said, we can get a lot. So that people who didn't think we'd be able to get more than 1 or 2 stories a week were probably surprised to see that we were able to. There were times when we moved 40 stories a day, kind of at the peak. And the idea, a lot of people had gotten the idea, I think, that theater is something that happened long ago and far away, that it was kind of over. And I think just the fact that we had news about things happening today, things happening this afternoon, every day, I feel like I did my part to kind of get Broadway. I mean, there was a period of time when, you know, if they made $500,000 a week, the whole industry, that was a big week for them. Whereas now, I mean, we got to the point in 2010, Richard, we had the first $1 billion Broadway season. Now, a lot of that is because the price of tickets went up. But I don't know if you remember, there was a long period of time where the Schuberts, their theaters would, all the theaters, not just the Schuberts, but the theaters would sometimes be empty for 2 seasons. And the Schuberts used to put a sign up on the marquee that said, see a show for the fun of it. That's what they would put on the marquee because there was no shows in those theaters. Now, there are sometimes producers waiting 3 or 4 deep for every single theater that comes available. And I feel like I played my little part in that to let people know that theater was alive now, not long ago.
Well, speaking of long ago, when Playbill.com started, how many employees did you have when you first started, and how did it actually get launched?
Let me see. We had 3 employees to start, and Katya Lundy, Diana Reese, and myself. And originally, now people are not going to believe this, but there was a time when they did not have browsers. They hadn't invented them yet. If you wanted to get someplace on the internet, you had to know the URL, and you had to type it in to get there. You could not say theater news, and it would show you a list of places you get theater news. That did not exist. They had in those days these news organizations. There was America Online and Prodigy and CompuServe and eWorld and what else? Genie. There were a couple of them. And you would buy a subscription to these things, and you would go in there, and they would they would show you where they repurpose news from websites, but they also created a lot of their own news. And that was their proprietary information. Once you got into them, you could find things. And then, so I started at Prodigy, and I was their arts editor. That was in 1988. So I have a online credit from 1988. And at that time, I was promoted then, I don't want to go into all the detail on this. I became a producer for them, and a producer is a drastically inflated title. Basically, what would happen is, magazine, the publisher would read in Publishers Weekly that there was this thing called the internet, and they had to get on it. And they would call in the vice president and say, "Get us on this." And the vice president would show up in my office, terrified, saying, "We're supposed to get on the internet. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do it." And I said, "Well, you have to have stuff to put on it. What would you like to put on?" And they would always say, "Oh, we'd like to put on some of our old back issues. That's it. We'll just put on our back issues. That'll be great." And I said, "That's not going to fly, my friend. Number one, the internet doesn't change every month. It doesn't change every week. It doesn't change every hour. It changes constantly. And it's interactive. So you can't just put stuff out. You have to listen to people and respond and interact with them." So I reconfigured a number of these magazines for the online world. And then one day my boss called me and said, "Oh, I've got one that I think you're going to like." I said, "What?" "Playbill." And I said, "Oh, that sounds great." So I met with the publisher of Playbill, and I said, what is your goal for this?" And he said, "I would like to make Playbill the encyclopedia of theater on the internet." And I said,
Wow.
"That sounds great. That sounds great." I said, what do you want to put in?" He said, "Well, we'd like to put in all our who's who's, and we'll become the encyclopedia of theater." I said, "Okay." Now I knew what their business model was, and I said, "How do you intend to pay for this?" He said, "Well, we'll have advertising." And I said, "How much advertising? You want to be the encyclopedia? How much advertising do you see in the encyclopedia? What you really want to be is the newspaper of theater on the internet, not the encyclopedia, because that newspaper in those days is where you saw all the ads."
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, we had this discussion, sort of what I just had with you. Or where are we going to find news? Or how is it going to, how much news can there be? I said, "Leave it to me." And so he actually hired me away from Prodigy to come over and start Playbill. So that's basically how Playbill got started. Now, I take a lot of credit for the news service. I have to say there were other people at Playbill who were very good at creating things like the Playbill Club and a number of other things for them. But then over the years, they also asked me to start their publishing division. So I did books for them. I was the editor of, wait a second, right there, the Playbill Broadway yearbook. I was editor of that. That was created during my tenure there. I started their travel division and a number of other divisions for them. Always with this, here's the thing. I love theater. I don't know if that's come across clearly in this, but I'd like to establish that. And I don't believe that theater is something in the past. I believe that theater is something in the present and the future. And so because of my media background, I always wanted us to stay, as they say in tennis, with your knees bent, to be ready anytime something new came along. Anytime there was some new medium, how can I get theater into that medium? How can I squeeze it in? What place can I find for theater in all these different media niches? And so that's what I did for 24 years, tried to find new ways to propagate theater, to get information out on theater, and to show people that theater was not something that was going to go the way of vaudeville, that it was something that it was going to thrive. And I think even with this, I have to tell you something. You know what inspires me? There's a couple of things from history that inspire me. Shakespeare. Go back to Uncle Bill. Most of Shakespeare's career in the 1600s, when he was writing Othello and Hamlet and many of the other great plays that he's known for, the theaters were closed because of the plague.
Mm-hmm.
They were closed. They open and close and open and close. But for most of that time, they were closed. And he took the time during that period when the theaters were dark, to sit down with his quill pen at the pub and sat there and scratched out some of the great masterpieces of all time, of our language and of any language. And I can't help but think that during this time, how many people do you know who've said, gosh, if only I had 6 months where I didn't have to work, the books I could write, the plays I could write.
And there's another one.
We're going to get
another thing, I keep hearing people say, I can't wait to have my life back. And I say to them, this is your life.
This is your life.
This is it right now.
This is it. Dreams of having. So I've tried to lead by example. Instead of just sitting around twiddling my thumbs, I found myself a beautiful wife, and I'm starting a new theater magazine. And that's what I did when I was on my summer vacation. And you know something? I ain't the only one. I'm sure that how am I sure? Because actually that's a story that we're doing for the second issue. What all these incredible theater artists, what did they do during the past 7 months? What did they do with this time? I have a feeling there are going to be some incredible writing coming out of this period. And, as much as we may have loved the last 10 years, theater is going to be different. It's going to be different. What we write about, it's like, look at the theater that was written during the Great Depression. People didn't want the Great Depression to hit, but theater people found a way to incorporate that and to tell their story. Brother, can you spare a dime? Look at all the amazing things of Thee I Sing. Just one amazing show.
I came to New York in August of 1979. And when I arrived in New York, first show I saw was Oklahoma at the Palace Theater.
That big revival.
Yes, the revival. And but it was also at that point, being a struggling artist in New York City, I saw everything. There were twofers, and there were standing room only. There were at Actors Equity. I could go once I got my equity card and get tickets to go see shows. And I love the theater, but the theater pretty much in recent years has become an elitist art form. The average person, families don't go to the theater anymore like they used to. For an average family, parents, 2 kids, to go to the theater, to go out to dinner, everything, it's going to be a $600 or $700 evening for them easily. How do you envision, us coming back, at a time where people have come through COVID, where they don't have the money to go to the theater, and it probably, for some people, as much as they want to be there, is not a priority in terms of the scheme of, survival. How do you envision people coming back to the theater?
Well, there was a period of time where if you bought a ticket and it said a price on it, that was the price that the ticket was. You might have gotten a twofer. You might have gone to the TKTS line, but basically the ticket price printed on the ticket is what they paid. That is no longer the case. It is much more like an airline ticket where the person sitting to the right of you paid twice as much as you did, and the person sitting to the left of you paid half as much as you did.
There is so much on both sides.
Right. Well, there's premium pricing for people who have the money, but there's so much discounting that goes on now. There is an enormous amount of discounting. There is a website that is devoted only to telling you what is the cheapest ticket that you can get for every show. People have really used the media to figure this out, and we started doing this at Playbill long ago, organizing, making the group rate available to everybody, and having discounts. It's funny, when we started up, people would offer us 5% discounts on ticket, and it was like 5% does not move the needle. At a certain point, we set a standard that it could not be less than 10%, or I don't remember, 20%, something. But there's a huge amount of discounting that goes on. Producers don't like to see empty seats. Actors don't like to see empty seats. And I think that there's going to be, if anything, the discounting that I mentioned is going to go into overdrive. It's possible that producers may lower some of their prices, but they also may raise their prices. You say that families don't go to the theater, but families. I remember a period of time when you'd go to a show and I would sit in my seat and I would turn around and it was all gray heads.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's so much programming for families. There's so many theaters. Don't forget that there was that one season, the season when The Prom opened, when pretty much every show that season had a prom in it.
Mm-hmm.
Mean Girls, show after show after show had a prom in it. Or a Halloween Party. That was another big one. That was one season, the season of the Halloween parties. Be More Chill, Dear Evan Hansen, Wicked. I mean, there are so many shows that are for families. And of course, I remember when Harry Potter and the Cursed Child opened and the ticket prices there, they said, that's going to run 6 months because nobody's going to want to pay. It's going to, instead of buying 1 or 2 tickets, you have to buy 3 or 4 tickets to take or 5 to take all your kids who read all those fat Harry Potter books. That show was still selling out on March 12th, and that thing had been running a year. There are people who have the money to pay full price, to pay premium ticket prices, but there's also enough discounting that goes on because the theater has, especially the commercial theater, has adopted the kind of the flexible pricing that the airlines did so successfully. But you know something also, Richard, I'd just like to jump in. We're talking mainly about Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much theater.
That's true.
In New York, in Chicago, in even Los Angeles, there is so much theater that goes on that is nowhere near the price of the tickets that we're talking about. Atlanta, Detroit, Nashville, all these towns have wonderful theaters, local theaters, mid-level theaters, not community theaters, not the national tour theaters, but just below that, they have an amazing variety of theaters. The more I research it, the more I find. And the tickets are not $100 for these things. These are wonderful theater experiences that people can have.
Now,
I think once people rediscover that, I think that that problem will be less.
Now, before we run out of time, I want to get back to Encore magazine, which is why we're here today to celebrate the launch. How does I've got the information scrolling at the bottom of the screen, and I also have the information on my Facebook page. But how does one get a subscription? How much is a subscription, and what can they get with their subscription?
First of all, the regular subscription is with $34.95, but if you order them now through the website, they're $29.95. And that entitles you to a year of Encore Monthly. Also, you have access to some special features on our website. But mainly, you're getting that beautiful magazine that connects you with. And one of the things that's also different from some of these other magazines that you mentioned is our voices. You're getting the voices of these incredible writers that you can't get just anywhere. I mean, there's a lot of these other magazines, they ran on the rocks because everything that they had in the magazine, you could look up online. You could get the same things for free elsewhere. Whereas for a very reasonable price, you're getting some of these incredible voices that I just mentioned to you. Speaking directly to you, custom written, things that you cannot find anyplace else. And that is what we're selling. We're selling our voice. We're selling our engagement with the theater. And you may have heard my passion for the theater. All of my writers, if you don't have that same passion, you do not get into Encore. And I have to tell you, I have been inundated with people who want to write for the magazine. And I'm very, very picky about who gets in. The only people who get in are the people who have unique voices. We have Evelyn Chow, who writes for the New York Times, and she writes for us. We just have just incredible people writing for us. And it's those voices that are at the heart of our mission.
Well, first of all, Robert, I want to thank you on your honeymoon for spending an hour with me this afternoon. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, and if you haven't done so already, please go to my website, which is richardskipper.com. Sign my guest book with your thoughts about the show. that helps to boost me in other markets. I also want to let everyone know that I will be back tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock with the one and only Warren Shine, who is an incredible entertainer. So I'm thrilled that he'll be joining us tomorrow afternoon. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. The holidays are coming up. So what I'd like everybody who watched the show today is to go to encoremonthly.com, and I want you to order 2 subscriptions, one for yourself and one for the 4th friend on your Facebook friends list. It's the number 4 today.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Go to your 4th friend. And I already know who I'm going to order it for. I've already reached out to you today, so you know who you are as well. And I also end every show. I want to thank you, Robert, for the gifts that you've given to the theater community and that you will continue to give. Let's meet again here in 5 years, and let's talk about the major success that Encore Monthly has created in the theater community. And I want to give you the last word. And you can talk about anything that we've covered today, anything that we didn't cover that you wish that we had, or any message that you want to put out to everyone who's listening at the time that we're living in. And again, thank you all for being here. And Robert, you're the best. I just love what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. And it goes both ways. I've always admired your devotion to Carol Channing, your devotion to Dolly, your devotion to all the wonderful things in our world. You have the true religion, my friend, as far as the theater is concerned. The only thing I'm going to say is, if you're an, as I mentioned, an aunt or an uncle or a parent, and you know a kid who's a little bit smarter than the other kids, a kid who's a little bit more creative, a kid who is a little bit more out there, who needs something to attach their passion to. These are the people, after you give it to the 4th person on your Facebook friends list, is to get something for them. I remember when I was that age, I remember asking my parents if I could have a subscription to Variety for Christmas. That was what I wanted, was a subscription because that's the only place where I could get the information that I needed. And I've tried to make Encore Monthly that thing for that. I try to publish it for me when I was 17 years old. And so if you know somebody like that, give them the gift of theater. You can't give them the live theater. This is the next best thing.
Amen. Thank you, Robert. Now go back to your honeymoon.
Thank you very much. My lovely bride is, I think, is watching in the next room.
Oh, good. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
You too.
Make it better tomorrow.
Yes.